Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Programming in Access 2013. My name is Steve Bishop, and today we're going to be continuing our series on VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications. And today we're going to be talking about looping statements. Now, looping statements are very helpful to have in our code because they allow us to perform a certain code block repeatedly over and over again until a condition is either met or is no longer met. And that gives us a lot of flexibility in our code and allows us to do a lot of different calculations. So first we're going to talk about the do while loop. Then we're going to go into the do until loop. Then we're going to talk about the for next loop. And finally we'll talk about the for each loop. Now each one of these looping statements has a very specific purpose and way that it handles looping. And basically what you need to do is try to figure out while you're coding which one of these four different loops is going to best handle what it is you want the code to do. Alright, so I'm going to hop out into our code. Just to show you, we've got our form here with a text box and the go button, which of course has the on-click event here, which is going to be this private sub that we had before. Alright, and then we're of course assigning the value. We have x dimmed as an integer. We're assigning the value that somebody typed in the text box to that x variable. And then we also have a string variable here. Alright, notice that I dimmed str message as a string, and then I'm initially setting its value to a blank string here. And you initialize it to a blank string by putting a double quotes there. Alright? So the do while loop. First, with the do while loop, you need to create some sort of variable here that you're going to run as a comparison value against your other value. Okay? So what you're doing is you're saying do this code block, what's inside of here, while y is less than or equal to x. So while the value of y is less than or equal to x, run whatever is in here. Okay? And then when it's done doing that code block, it's going to loop back up to the top of the do while. So let's just see what this looks like here. Oops, hit the wrong button there. Alright, so we're going to use the number 3. I'm going to click go. And I've got a breakpoint here, which allows us to step through the code line by line and see what's going on. So first we initialize our value of y to 0, and there you can see when I hover the mouse over the variable, we actually can see what its current value is, which is just 0. Alright, I can also do it over this value here, this y here, and I can also do it over the x here, which tells us that x is currently equal to 3. So we're doing this code block while y is less than or equal to x. Is 0 less than or equal to 3? Yes, it is, so it's going to go ahead and run what's inside the code block. Now you'll notice that now the str message string has the value of 0 in it. Okay? And then when we run through it again, we're going to see that it now has the 0 and the 1 because y is now equal to 1. Okay? So 1 is still less than or equal to 3. It ran through, added that to our current string message, and then it's going to go back here and it's going to add 1 to y. Now you may be wondering, why do I have this y equals y plus 1? Well, if you think about it, you have to increase the value of y by some value so that it eventually does equal this, or I should say, this will no longer be true. Because so long as this is true, your code is going to continuously run, and you can get stuck in an infinite loop. Okay? We don't want infinite loops. It locks up your application. The user can't use access anymore. They have to actually exit out of the application. It becomes really problematic, and there's really no error message that the user gets popped up with to tell you what the problem is. So you absolutely must be sure that you are increasing the value of y by 1 each time that you go through the do while loop. Okay, so the value of y currently is 1. When I step past this, you'll see that y now equals 2 because it just added 1 to the current value of y. Then it's going to loop back here. Do while y is less than or equal to x. Is 2 less than or equal to x? It certainly is. So it goes through and loops again. Is 3 less than or equal to 3? Yes, it is equal to 3 still. So it's going to loop through it one more time. And now y is equal to 4. So when it comes back up here to do the evaluation here, 4 is not less than or equal to x. So it's just going to skip over and drop all the way down here where we're actually displaying our message as a message box. So you can see we exited out of the do while loop. Okay? And then of course we get our pop-up message here that says 0, 1, 2, and 3. Great. So that's what we should be seeing. All right? So let me go ahead and comment that do while loop out. Now we're going to talk about the do until loop. The do until loop is very, very similar to the while loop, but essentially what's going to run here is going to happen when this equation is false. Okay, so long as this is false, this code block will run. Once this function is true, then it will go ahead and exit out. All right, so we're still instantiating, we're still creating a y variable and setting its initial value to 0. Then we're going to say do this code block until y is greater than or equal to x. Okay, so in that particular case, let me just go ahead and put a breakpoint there. Again, we have 3 as our number. Click on go. Our initial value of y is 0. Is y greater than or equal to 3? No, it's not. So it's going to go ahead and run the code that's in here. Okay. Then we've increased the value of y by 1, just like we did in the while loop. Again, we do this because if we don't, then we're going to be stuck in an infinite loop, and our access database is going to lock up on us. It's going to loop back up here. Now the value of y is 1. Is y, is 1 greater than or equal to 3? No, it's not, so it's going to run it again. Is 2 greater than or equal to 3? No, it is not. Okay, now is 3 greater than or equal to 3? Yes, it is. So notice now it's going to skip over that code block and go down to the next statement. Okay, so we're exiting out of our do while once this condition is met. All right, then we're just going to pop that message box up, 0, 1, and 2. That's all fine and dandy there. Now, what's unique also about the do while and the do until loop is that it's a little bit more malleable than you might initially think. I can take this until part and I can actually cut it and put it at the end after the loop statement. Okay? So now what's going to happen is it gets the do loop here, and there's no value for it to evaluate, so it'll go ahead and run what is in the code block. Then it gets to the loop statement, and this is saying loop back to the do until this is a true statement. All right, so if we do this again, we'll see it's going to go ahead and run whatever our initial code block says to do. So y currently is 0. It's going to go ahead and add a 0 to it. Then it's going to increase it by 1. It gets to the loop until, and then it says, okay, is 1 greater than or equal to 3? It is not, so it's going to go back up to the do and just go ahead and run the next code block. And then it's going to continuously loop through until eventually that variable, which is 3, is equal to or less than, or is equal to or greater than 3. All right. Now the advantage of this is that what you're doing is you're saying, no matter what, at least run this the first time. Because if I set that initial value to 0, notice that it's still going to run. So y is currently 0, x is 0, but we're still going to go ahead and run this statement at least one time, and then when this value is true, it's just going to go ahead and move on down. So we get at least one loop through our code block before it exits out. All right, that's the advantage of putting your until, and you can also do that with the while statement up here. You can drop the while and put it up here after the loop of it as well, and that will do exactly the same thing as it does here. It will go ahead and run this code block first, and then if this condition is met, then it goes ahead and drops out here on the do until loop. All right, so that's the do until loop. Let's go ahead and block that out here. And let's uncomment out our for next loop. Now you'll notice that this is only 3 lines of code, and this will behave identically to the do while loop. What's going on here in the for next loop is what you're essentially doing is you're saying instantiate my value of y to 0 to start with, and then to x, okay? And we'll go over what this step 2 means in just a minute. But essentially, first, y does not have a value leading up to our for loop. We haven't given it a value at this point. It's just, right now, it's just a dim y as integer up in memory. But now, within the actual for next loop itself, we're actually able to assign it initial value. And then we're saying, for while that is equal to this, to x, whatever x is, while it's between those numbers, go ahead and run whatever is in this code block. Okay? And that to loop probably, or that to keyword probably looks familiar. That's what the same keyword we used in the case statement when we were looking between 2 different numbers, and any number that came up as true between those 2 numbers would cause that case block to trigger. Well, that's the same thing in a for next loop. It's going to run this str message and add the y value to the message each time that 0 is less than, essentially, basically between the value of 0 and whatever is an x, which happens to be 3 currently. Okay. Now the step 2, this is an alternative. This is kind of a variable. I don't need to have this in here. You can leave that out. And by default, what happens is that automatically, after this code block is run, y will be increased by 1 automatically. Okay, that's just by default. Y will then have an increase of 1 added to it. So let's just go ahead and see what that looks like. So currently y is equal to 0 because we're assigning it here a value of 0, and x is 3. So str message, just want to double check, yeah, okay. So str message is going to have the value of y added to it, which is 0. So now str message equals 0. Next y, now you can see y is equal to 1, okay, and then it's equal to 2, and then it's equal to 3. And now that we have 3 and 3, since it's between 0 to 3, it's still going to run this one more time, but then that's it, and then we're going to have the message box pop up. Okay, so you can see how it automatically increases the y value by 1 for us. And this is a nice little way of doing essentially a do while loop without having to create and set your y value to 0 first, and then also allows you to not forget to increase the value by 1 each and every single time. So this is a very handy short way, do quick code that's going to be much smaller and easier for you to try to troubleshoot. All right. Just go ahead and continue on here. You see 0, 1, 2, and 3. That's perfectly good. Now let's talk about that step 2 that we had up here. Oops, if I could type here. Step 2. Essentially what we're doing with the step 2 is we're saying instead of by default increasing the y value by 1 each time, I want you to increase it by 2. Okay, so let's just set a breakpoint on there and let's see what that looks like. I'm going to set this to a little higher number here. Let's go with 6. Oh. All right. So first, y is going to be equal to 0. Okay. Y is equal to 0. Y is going to put in a 0 value into that str message. Then it's going to go ahead and increase y by 2. See that? Now it went from equaling 0 to equaling 2. Okay. So when I hover the mouse over there, we can see the value of y is 2. When it goes to the next one, now it's 4. Now it's 6. So that's what the step statement is for. You can increase the value by a very specified numerical amount. Okay? Just go ahead and finish this up. 2, 4, and 6. Those are our values for y. All right. Comment that out. Now the last loop that we're going to talk about is very complex, okay? But it's really a neat mechanism, especially when we're dealing with objects or arrays, okay? When we're dealing with basically what you would consider a collection of items. Now, an array is a very special type of variable because it's one variable that can hold many different values, okay? Now, with an array, it's very important that you give it each individual value that you're going to assign to it must be of the same type. So in an array, the way we dim an array is we first have to give it a name, which is A in this case, and then in parentheses we're going to give it what we call the subscript. We're going to say what its top end subscript value is. And in this case we've given it 2. Now with arrays, they start with a value of 0. So the first A array is 0. So you would put in A0, and that will give you the first value in that A array. If you put in A1, that will give you the second value. And then A2 would give you the third value, and so on and so on. When we're dimming our array, we must say what the top level, what's the highest number of subscript that we will have in this variable, or excuse me, in this array. What's the highest number? What's the highest subscript number that we could have? And in that case is 2. So that means we're going to have 3 values that go in there. Oh, get rid of that. So we're going to have 3 values that go into this A array, and each one of them is going to be an integer. Okay? We'll talk about the dim B as variant here a little bit later, but what you could find here is that for next loop that we were dealing with before is going to go ahead and add to the y is going to the I should say the y subscript of A is going to add whatever the value of y is to that subscript. So for y equals 0 to 2, so when it goes 0 and then 1 and then 2, it's going to go ahead and add 0 and then 1 and then 2 to the array of A, and it's going to loop through. Okay? I know it's kind of complicated. It's arrays are kind of funky things. I actually prefer not dealing with arrays whenever I can, but there certainly are uses for them. I prefer dealing with things called collections and dictionaries, which we'll get into at another time. But for right now, just know that I'm filling in this array, which is capable of holding multiple different values inside of it, and I'm giving it its own, whatever the value of y is at the time, I'm going to assign it to whatever that subscript is of A. Now here's the good stuff. Okay, now that I've got my array of A filled with different values, what I can do is I can say for each B in A, and notice that we dimmed B as a variant, okay? We named it a variant because it's not an integer. What's going to happen is this is going to return an object, all right? Now the object that we're going to be returning is of type variant. And that gives us the flexibility of not knowing ahead of time what exactly the object is that's going to be returned. So we're saying for each B in A, so for each object in the array of A, go ahead and put in strMessage, you're going to add to strMessage the value of B, okay, which is at this particular point is just an integer, all right, and we're going to add it to that strMessage. So for each B object in A, you're going to add whatever it finds that B is. All right? That's kind of a lot to go through. I'm going to set a couple of different breakpoints here so you can see what this looks like. We're going to go ahead and go back to just using 3 here. All right, for Y, which is 0 to 2, we're going to fill our array. The first time it was 0 and 0. So we're filling array subscript 0 with the value of 0. Then we're going to do it again. This time y is equal to 1. And now it's y equal to 2. And then we're done filling in our array. All right? Now, what we're saying is for each b in our array of A, we're going to run this code block here, the str message block here. All right? And the value of b is currently 0. The value of A, notice that we can't get a value of A because it's an array. It's not an actual, just a single integer. It's filled with different values. So it's going to go ahead and give us the value of b, which is currently 0, and add it to our str message. All right, it's going to do it again because for each one of the different arrays that we have in A, it's going to go ahead and do that. Notice that the advantage of doing the for each is that we don't need to know how many variables there are in A. We don't need to know how many there are. It's just going to do it for each one. Okay, and it's not going to miss one. It's not going to skip any. It's going to actually go and find each and every single value inside the A array and return it as the value B. All right? That's really, really handy, especially when you're dealing with objects. You'll see that I will use this for each loop a lot when we're dealing with objects. All right. That's a lot to cover. It's a lot to soak in. I highly recommend you go back and rewatch this video because these looping statements are very, very important. You will be using them constantly in your application, especially when we start trying to pull data out of record sets that come out of the tables and we start wanting to display that to the user. These different looping mechanisms would become very, very important.